He heard our daughter telling me to go with my lover. Never in my dreams I thought he'll do this then.
Life is full of ups and downs, mostly the down. It's funny how men are taught to be strong and tough, and yet when you decide to unleash your toughness, society will call you a heartless man. I know a lot of people are going to judge, but I'm still going to share my story, so that no man out there will ever have to go through what I went through. I don't even know where to start my story from. My daughter encouraged my wife to divorce me and move on with her lover, but I made sure I dealt with both of them. I planned a big revenge for them. I actually got the last laugh. Can you imagine your own daughter and only child standing against you and supporting her mother to divorce you? Have you ever experienced such a horrible situation? Well, I have, and I can tell you it's a bad place to be in. But I'm glad I didn't let my wife and daughter ruin my life. Instead, I ruined theirs. I know a lot of you keypad warriors will call me a heartless man, but I honestly don't care. Wait till you experienced half of what I went through before you call me names. For the sake of privacy and my desire to not reveal my identity, I will be using fake names. My name is Stanley. I'm a 40-year-old pilot, and my wife's name is Annabelle, and she is 35 years old. Annabelle and I got married 15 years ago, and our marriage is blessed with a daughter, Stacy, who is 14 years old. Annabelle and I met 20 years ago in our first year in college. It wasn't love at first sight because Annabelle was my then-girlfriend's friend. My then-girlfriend cheated on me, not that I caught her though, it was Annabelle that told me about it. I didn't confront my then-girlfriend, I just broke up with her. That's how me and Annabelle began dating. I wanted to get back at my then-girlfriend so bad for cheating on me, so I was using Annabelle to achieve that. That was how Annabelle got pregnant in our final year in college, and I was forced to marry her. Although she claimed she lost the baby 1 month after our wedding, I never believed her. I wasn't convinced. Something tells me she was never pregnant to begin and that the whole pregnancy was a sham. I'm sure she did all that to trap me. But over the years, I grew to love her. All through our marriage, I was there for her, physically, emotionally, and in all aspects, despite my busy schedules. I made sure she never lacked anything. When she gave birth to our daughter, Stacy, I opened a big jewelry store for her. I bought most of our properties in my wife's and daughter's name, big mistake. Stacy, our daughter, was always close with Annabelle. I know a lot of people always say daughters are daddy's girls, but in my case, it wasn't. Stacy was closer to her mother than me. And no, it wasn't because I wasn't always around. Despite my busy schedules, I still made sure I had time for my family. I create time for them. We go out for fun activities almost every week, but I noticed Stacy preferred her mom's company than mine. Initially, I thought it was adolescent shenanigans, but I was wrong. I'm a loving person, but also very strict. I loved my daughter so much, but I was very strict with her. I made sure she wore age-appropriate clothes, limiting her screen time so she could concentrate on her schoolwork and physical activities. But Annabelle, on the other hand, was the opposite. Annabelle single-handedly spoiled our little girl. Exposing her to a lot of things like adult magazines, unlike me, Annabelle allows her to dress how she pleases, allowing her much screen time. So she preferred her mom to me and always looked forward to days when I won't be home so she could have utmost freedom. I still don't understand why Annabelle over-pampered our daughter. She was always trying to be on her good side. Each time I questioned her on why she is spoiling Stacy too much. She always said Stacy was her only child. That was how our daughter became an unruly teenager. All through our 15 years of marriage, I never suspected Annabelle was cheating on me. In fact, we made a promise to each other 10 years ago on our anniversary that we will never cheat on each other and that we will make our marriage work. So I never imagined that Annabelle would ever cheat on me. I started noticing things were off 6 months ago, so I took a 1-month leave from work. I wanted to understand what was happening in my home, and honestly, I'm glad I listened to my instincts and took that leave. I started suspecting Annabelle 6 months ago when I returned from a trip unannounced. It was supposed to be a 1-month trip, but was cut short due to some unforeseen issues. I arrived to meet an empty home. I wanted to surprise my wife and daughter, but unfortunately, I was the one that got surprised. I didn't meet anyone at home when I arrived. I waited till in the evening before making any move because I initially thought they went out for groceries shopping or they were out for fun. After waiting for hours without any sight of them, I called Annabelle and pretended like I was still on my trip. I asked if she was at home and she said yes. I requested we do a video call because I wanted to see our daughter. She told me our daughter was already asleep in her room and she wouldn't want to disturb her. It was at that point I started suspecting her. I told her I would love to see her face as I have missed her a lot. At that point, Annabelle flared up and started questioning whether I was doubting her. She became defensive. I told her I was at home and wanted to surprise her and Stacy. It was then she told me she was at her parents' place and didn't want to bother about it. She sounded dumb. I knew she was lying, but I played along. The following morning, she came as early as 6 a.m. It was at that point my suspicion grew. We stay in Los Angeles and her parents stay in Chicago, so I was shocked at how fast she arrived the following day. She apologized for not informing me about going to her parents' place earlier, and I acted as if I was over it. I took leave of work so I could get to the bottom of everything. One day, while Annabelle was deep asleep, I looked through her phone and discovered her messages folder and WhatsApp messages were empty. I found it unbelievable because the Annabelle I know was always on her phone. Since I couldn't get anything from her phone, I hired some private detective to follow her and report to me. That was how I got to find out about the woman I was married to. The private detective always reports her movements. Every day Annabelle will dress up and tell me she was going to her jewelry store, but the private detective, she went to a hotel with proofs. She was always changing hotels every day, expensive hotels. After putting all my findings together, I discovered my beloved wife was cheating on me. Not with one person, but with numerous guys. I was shocked and hurt at first, but after some time I decided to count my losses and just move on. The worst part of this betrayal was that my little daughter Stacy was involved. She usually takes her along on most of this visit to the hotels. While she is busy in the hotels with her boyfriend, Stacy will be at the reception waiting for her. I was so mad at her for exposing our little girl to such a lifestyle at an early age, but I decided to keep calm. I wanted to have enough evidence before doing anything. I also found out she spends my money on these guys. Most of them are jobless guys roaming the street. Most of them are even young enough to be her son. I was so hurt and angry at the same time. I can't believe the woman I have done so much for would turn back to hurt me this much. It was at that point I started regretting everything. I regretted ever marrying the gold-dinging. I never imagined Annabelle would pay me back like this after picking her up from poverty and paying most of her school loans to establish her and make her who she is today. I decided to pay her back in her own coin. I started plotting my revenge. One day I told Annabelle I was going on a 1-month trip. She acted sad as usual and told me she was going to miss me, but they were all lies. I left the house and checked into a hotel nearby. I asked the private detectives to continue watching the house and alert me of any suspicion. It didn't take long, guys. Update. Hi guys, I'm back to update you guys on how everything went down. 2 days after I left the house, the private detectives I hired informed me there was a young man at my home. I waited till the following day to make sure my daughter was in school before storming the house. Meanwhile, I forgot to mention to you guys that I secretly installed CCTV camera in our living room and bedroom. While in my hotel room, I was monitoring what was happening when I saw my wife and her lover were already naked and intimate. It was then I stormed the house. Annabelle was shocked when I arrived. She had to clean her eyes 3 times. Maybe she thought she was dreaming. She jumped up and started shedding crocodile tears. She told me she could explain and that I shouldn't jump to conclusions. Women are funny. She must really take me for a fool. While Annabelle was busy pleading, her lover boy quickly wore his clothes and tried to escape, but unfortunately for him, I caught him and gave him a beating he would never forget in his lifetime. As for Annabelle, I gave her 3 dirty slaps. I pushed her out and threw her things out. The only thing I was saying at that point was why. I kept asking why until she finally opened her mouth to talk. She told me it was loneliness that pushed her into having an affair since I wasn't around. She opened her stupid mouth to tell me she got bored at a point, that is why she cheated. I was perplexed, guys. Even though I was always not around, I made sure we communicated 3 times a day despite my busy schedules. I made sure to always be at home and spend time with my family whenever my job permits. I was working for her and our daughter to be comfortable, and she was busy spending the money on random guys. At that point, I didn't even know how to react. I honestly didn't know what to do. I was boiling inside, yet so calm. I didn't even know where the strength came from. I went inside, brought out all the designer clothes, shoes, and bags I bought for her and burnt everything. Even the one she bought for herself, I burnt everything to ashes. Her cry became louder when she saw her valuables burning into flames. The more she cried, the more I felt relieved. She knelt down and started pleading for mercy, that this is the first time she was cheating on me, but I told her it was late. I told her I started suspecting her from the day I came back home and she wasn't at home, but lied that she was at her parents' place in Chicago just to arrive early in the morning the following day. I told her everything from hiring private detectives to follow her around to secretly installing CCTV cameras in our living room and bedroom. She was shocked to hear all these. In fact, she was too stunned to even utter a word. I was so furious that I almost started hitting her, but I held myself back. Honestly, it hurts. How can my so-called wife be cheating and spending my hard-earned money on little boys while I'm outside hustling for our daily bread? Not just that she even had the audacity to bring one of those low-lives to our home and sleep with him on our matrimonial bed. That was the height for me. I asked her to leave and never show her face in my house ever again. She stayed outside crying and begging until our daughter Stacy arrived. She narrated everything to her, and Stacy started advising her mother to divorce me and take half of my properties so she could move on living her best life with her lover. I was surprised, guys. I couldn't believe my ears. I came out to meet them and asked her to repeat what she said, and she audibly repeated it. I was shocked to hear that from a 14-year-old. Stacy told me I never loved her and she is never free to be herself whenever I'm around. She told me she is not proud of me as a father. I was too stunned to speak. It still stings up till this day hearing that from my own child. I never knew Stacy had become that disrespectful. I always excuse her tantrums for puberty, but seeing how talked to me that day made me realize my little girl was gone. I mean, I couldn't even recognize the person that was standing in front of me talking. I couldn't believe my eyes. How can a 14-year-old be spilling such nonsense? She even went as far as telling me that I was good for nothing, and that fact that her mom deserves better and I wasn't good for her. She said I was too rigid for her liking and that I wasn't as cool as her mom. For a moment, I wanted the ground to open so it could just swallow me up. How can the daughter I love so much be talking to me in this manner? It felt ganged up. She told her mom to stop crying and just divorce me so she could continue enjoying her life with her lover. Annabelle and Stacy parked their stuff from my house and left. It was at that point I made up my mind to teach the two of them a story. The following day, I sent divorce papers through my lawyer to Annabelle. My lawyer was skeptical about the divorce because all my properties were bought in Annabelle and Stacy's name, but I assured him I had a good plan in motion. Annabelle called me after receiving the divorce papers and told me she was ready for the divorce. Soon the divorce proceedings started, and it wasn't as I anticipated, but I refused to be distracted. The whole process wasn't seamless like I had imagined, but everything was worth it as our divorce was later finalized. Annabelle got almost everything and we both got joint custody of our daughter. But I told Annabelle I wasn't interested in raising Stacy any longer since she is already doing a good job at that. The day we got divorced, Stacy was the most excited. She told me she was finally free from my unnecessary nagging. I don't blame her though, if only she knew what I had planned out for her and her mother. That is, guys. That was how I lost my family and all the things I have worked for years. After the divorce, I started with my plans to make Annabelle and Stacy cry. I made a plan with a young friend of mine, Alexander. Knowing how shameless Annabelle was, I knew she would fall for his tricks. He disguised himself as a realtor and a very rich young man. I gave him all the necessary information he needed about Annabelle, where he could meet her and how he should woo her, and as expected, Annabelle fell for his trick. They started having an affair. Annabelle fell head over heels for him because, unlike her previous lover, Alexander was rich. Alexander was spending money on her, taking her shopping and going on expensive trips for 2 months. Annabelle felt safe, and at that point we struck. I drafted a business proposal about investing in real estate, which Alexander took to Annabelle. Unfortunately for us, she fell into our trap. The deal was very cheap. Only a greedy person would fall for that, and Annabelle, being Annabelle, fell for it. She put all the properties she got from me up for sale at a cheaper price, and through the help of my lawyers, I was able to purchase it without her knowing. That was how I got all my properties back for peanuts. Annabelle was desperate for money, so she sold off everything very cheap down to her jewelry store. I acquired everything and continued with my plans. So Annabelle sold off everything and gave Alexander the money. That was how she lost everything. She even borrowed some money so could make up for the amount requested for the investment. Alexander brought the money to me as agreed. I paid him off, that was it. That was the beginning of Annabelle's downfall. It was a grace-to-grace situation. That was how I got everything I lost back with even some free money. It felt good to finally give them a taste of their own medicine. That was the beginning of their nightmares. Annabelle soon became a shadow of herself. She tried calling me once and I blocked her number. Stacy also started calling me out of nowhere. This is someone that never called me before. I blocked her number also. They soon became homeless because they could no longer afford to pay for rent. Can you imagine living in a luxurious mansion to living in a rented apartment and to no longer not being able to pay rent? It was at that point Annabelle and Stacy came back to beg me. I can't still remember that day vividly. I was shocked to see them, but I wasn't surprised. They both knelt down and asked for my forgiveness, but I refused and sent them away. I decided to go into the next stage of my plans. I hacked into Annabelle's Facebook account through the help of a friend and uploaded her numerous cheating videos I was able to get from the CCTV camera I secretly installed. Our close friends and family abused her to the point she had to deactivate her social media account. Some of them who weren't aware about our divorce called to sympathize with me for marrying such a public disgrace. Honestly, I felt good subjecting her to such embarrassment. She was so ashamed she couldn't move outside for days. With her nude pictures flying online, no job, and no money to pay rent, she moved in to go squat with her friend. Not just that, I stopped giving her parents the upkeep money I usually give them every month. I stopped sponsoring the brother in Harvard, and I chased the parents out of the house I bought for them. I know a lot of you will say I'm heartless, but I don't care. Only I understand what I went through. Only I know what I invested in Annabelle and I family, how I worked my ass off so she could be comfortable, how I gave her and our daughter the very best, but what did I get in return? Betrayal. So I don't care about anything you guys have to say. I wished I listened to my parents when they asked me not to give in to pressure and marry Annabelle when she claimed she was pregnant and was pressuring me for marriage. Annabelle and her parents pressured me to the extent I had to give in and marry her despite my parents' refusal. My parents were never in support of our union, but for my sake, they had to adjust to the fact that Annabelle was my wife. Initially, I thought they were against the marriage because Annabelle wasn't in the same social class as us, but they told me there's something about Annabelle that was off, and the fact that people like her are gold diggers. I wished I listened to them honestly. My mom especially had her reservation after she saw our Annabelle was shopping for the most expensive accessories during our wedding. My parents sponsored our wedding. Annabelle took that liberty and ordered all the expensive stuff. I felt embarrassed, but I never read the meaning into it. I thought she was just excited to finally get married. The whole greediness continued into our marriage, but since I could provide, I never complained about it. Looking back right now, I think I made the most sacrifice in our marriage. Annabelle never loved me. To her, I was just a ladder she needed to get up, and I'm glad I sent her back to the slum where she belongs. It was after my divorce that I found out the truth about my then-girlfriend in college. She was my first love, my best friend, and everything. I found out she never cheated on me, and in fact, Annabelle planned the whole thing. Even the pregnancy was fake. She was never pregnant. At that point, I felt used, but I'm happy I taught her a lesson she would never forget in her lifetime. Although I found out the truth late, I'm still glad I finally got to know the truth. As for Stacy, my daughter, I couldn't just look away. She was still my daughter anyways. I took responsibility for her education, but I made sure she stayed with her mom. I withdrew her from the expensive private school she was attending and enrolled her in a public school. I wanted to teach her a lesson. I stopped giving her pocket money after my divorce with mom. I also took her phones and gadgets and told her she would only have access to those things when she finally graduates from the top of her class. I also took away all the privileges she enjoyed before. No outing, just school, no social activities, no shopping. I told her I would completely withdraw any form of support from her if I didn't see any substantial changes after 6 months. That was how I started seeing some changes in her. One day she begged me to please allow her to come and stay with me as she wasn't comfortable living in a shared apartment with her mom and her mom's friend. She told me she is not used to such a lifestyle and she is finding it hard to adjust. I told her it wasn't possible and that she would soon get used to it. It was my way of teaching her that the grass isn't always greener on the other side and that all that glitters isn't always gold. That is my story, guys. I hope someone out there learns something from my story. Don't be too soft as a man, and most importantly, avoid getting married to a gold digger as a wife. They will ruin your life. Imagine being left on your wedding day at the altar alone, weeping, holding your flower bouquet and looking dumbfounded. You know the kind of feeling you get: pain, sadness, and a whole lot of emotions. It all happened to me in one day. Before you start to feel sympathy for me, it was all my fault, and I should have seen it coming. But fun superseded reality. This happened weeks ago, and up until now, I still feel all the emotions I felt that very day. Hi Redditors, I am Amanda, and I am 24 years old, and I'm going to tell you the story of how I ended up alone at the altar on my wedding day. It's going to be a very long story, so please stay with me till the end. I am an only child and came from a poor family background. We barely had enough to feed on, not to talk of enough to pay for the rent. I managed to get into middle school on a scholarship because of my exceptional brilliance. Whenever I got back from school, I still had to help my parents, particularly my mom. My dad worked as a chauffeur for one of the rich men in our neighborhood, while my mom worked as a maid for the same family. Although I was ashamed of their job, I had no choice but to accept it. I got into a very prestigious high school also on scholarship. I tried grooving along with my classmates at school, but they separated themselves according to status. We had the upper class, middle class, and lower class. Funny enough, I was in the lower class because I got a scholarship and they somehow knew my family background. I tried out all the extracurricular activities, but I wasn't allowed into any of them because of my status. So I decided to be the invisible person all through my senior year. and soon I graduated. When I graduated, I couldn't attend college because of my parents' financial status, so I decided to work as a sales assistant in a clothing store. That was where I met Franklin. I had just started working my night shift when this lady came in saying she wanted one of the most unique and exquisite designs we have in the store. I showed her our latest designs and told her if she orders for it today, it would be delivered personally to her address and requested for the address. She gave it to me without problem and gave me her credit card for payment. Unfortunately, while she wanted to hand it over to me, it fell, and that is when she went ballistic, calling me all sorts of names and passing disrespectful comments at me. I stood silently and just kept on apologizing. While others in the store just stood and watched, Franklin decided to step in. He gave an earful to the lady. She was embarrassed and left the store immediately, saying that she wasn't going to come to our store again. I was thankful to him for his help, and he told me to learn to stand up for myself. He also complimented my look and said he felt sympathy towards me, and that was why he decided to help me. He also introduced himself and told me that he was into real estate and has a company of his own. From then on, our friendship started. He started coming more often and sometimes waited for my shift to end and dropped me home. I told him that I wasn't able to go to college because of my family background. He felt pity towards me and said he decided to help me with my college. He sponsored me throughout my college days, and after 4 years, I was done. On my graduation night was Franklin's birthday, which of course I was invited to. When I got there, he couldn't take his eyes off me and told me how pretty I was. Immediately at that spot, he asked me to be his girlfriend. I hesitated at first, but later gave in. We sealed it up with a kiss. I started searching for employment and wanted to start going for interviews. Franklin, however, told me not to bother myself and come and work for him at his company, since he needed a secretary to take care of some of his work. It was a win-win situation. I started working with Franklin immediately. He had a partner in his office who was also the co-owner of the company named Clark. He introduced us to one another, and I immediately clicked with him. Soon, I started working with both of them, and things were going great in all our lives. I later moved out of my place and moved in with him as he requested. But later, things became different between us. Franklin had been distant, preoccupied with work and other commitments. I think Clark sensed that something was off because he usually asked us indirectly if we were okay, but we didn't say anything. I think he didn't want to push me to talk or pry into my personal life, so he never actually talked to me personally. Before I knew it, things took a turn for the worse for me, of course. I don't know how it started, but I began having an affair with Clark. Clark was a really good person, and he was very friendly. It was easy to vibe with him, and he was the type of friend you would want to keep for a long time. He was the one that greeted me first in the office, and I greeted him back, not knowing his identity. But sometime after, Franklin was the one that introduced us. He told me he was his longtime friend, and they started this business together. I smiled at Clark, and he smiled back at him. There were times where Franklin usually traveled, and it was just usually Clark coming to the office, and we'd greet each other. That was how we started talking. It had started innocently and friendly, though, with a few flirtatious conversations here and there. But soon, our relationship turned physical, though it wasn't planned that way. It happened when Franklin decided to go on an impromptu business trip to check on a property and finalize a deal, which he could have assigned another person to do it, but he decided to. When he later left, leaving me alone in the office, I was so annoyed and just engrossed myself in work to forget the pain, but it wasn't enough. I decided to pour it all out over a drink. I decided to go to a bar to get my mind off things. I didn't want to stay alone in the office at home. I felt so lonely and I needed someone to talk to. I racked my brain to see who I would call, but no one came to mind because I didn't have many friends. I went to the bar and asked the bartender for a few drinks. I was feeling a little tipsy when I heard a familiar voice call my name. I looked up and saw Clark, and the look on his face was either concerned or worried. I couldn't tell, but I felt like I was imagining it because I was drunk. He asked me if I was okay, and I just smiled and nodded. I took another shot, and I was about to take one more when Clark stopped me. He told me to stop drinking because I was already getting drunk. I also felt like I was getting drunk because I am a light drinker, and I hadn't even drunk up to 5 shots. I told him to leave me alone, but he didn't answer. He was holding my hands, and I think it was because I was drunk, but I was feeling a certain type of way. I wasn't getting enough touch from Franklin. It had been a long time since we had actually slept together and enjoyed each other. It was either we did nothing at all or a little quickie, but I didn't feel anything. I think Clark realized he couldn't stop me, so he decided to sit with me and drink with me. He asked me what was wrong, and I didn't want to say anything at first, but I began spilling out how Franklin didn't have my time anymore and I felt lonely. Clark said he understood, and when Franklin got back from his trip, he would talk to him. I wanted to tell him not, but I didn't have the strength. I kept drinking, and Clark saw that I couldn't even stand anymore, so he stopped me. He told me it was time to go home, and I protested. I finally agreed with him, but I told him I could walk and didn't need help. I stood up and almost fell down, but he caught me and just laughed at me. He said if I was going to drive like this, I was going to get in an accident. He didn't drink much, so I'm guessing he was just a little tipsy. So he decided to take me home since I had my keys. When we got home, he placed me on the bed, but my arms were still wrapped around him. At that moment, I needed someone, and I didn't want him to leave. So I did the next thing that came to my mind. I still blame the fact that I was under the influence when I put my lips against his. I thought he was going to push me back, but he gave in and he kissed me deeply. It felt like heaven, and I didn't want that to end. Our clothes were off, and before I knew it, we ended up sleeping together. Although I didn't remember much, I knew I was the one who initiated it, and I wouldn't deny that he was very good in bed, and that was one of the best feelings I'd had. The next day when we woke up, we both felt weird and guilty, and for some reason I didn't regret it. I knew I wanted it, and I blamed Franklin because he never had my time and had slept with me for a very long time. Clark was feeling guilty for betraying his best friend. I know this because he told me and said he wanted to tell Franklin, but I told him not to. I was indifferent about the whole situation. I told Clark not to worry, and we didn't need to tell Franklin about this. It was his fault anyway, as he engrossed himself in work instead of giving me the attention I yearned for. I found myself wanting Clark more in a way that I never thought. It was weird. I couldn't help myself from having feelings for him. Deep down at first, I felt guilty for cheating on Franklin, but it was too late. Clark was giving me more things than Franklin was. He swept me off my feet, showering me with attention and affection that I had been missing in my relationship with Franklin. I kept trying to meet up with Clark, but for some reason he was avoiding me. One day, Franklin later decided to take me on a lunch date at a cafe where he suddenly proposed to me. I could have said no and ended things, but I still loved Franklin too. I didn't want things to end, so instead I said yes, and he slipped the ring into my finger while everybody else in the cafe applauded. As we sat back down in awkward silence, my phone buzzed with a message from Clark. I quickly glanced at the screen and felt a rush of excitement at the thought of seeing him later that night. But as I looked up, I saw the confusion in Franklin's eyes, and for a second I felt a wave of guilt washing over me, and felt a lump form in my throat as I struggled to find the right words. But I maintained my composure, and when he asked why my phone buzzed, I told him that it was a text from a friend of mine. He knew I had no friends and even got more confused, but I told him that I made friends with one of the office staff. He told me that he was happy I did and gave me a big smile. That night, I snuck out of the house while Franklin was deep in sleep to meet Clark at a motel not so far from our house. I felt a rush of excitement and fear at the same time as I got closer to the motel, leaving behind a sleeping Franklin, afraid that he might wake up. When I got to Clark, I told him that we had to hurry up as I needed to be back home before Franklin suspects. He said he wanted to apologize that he had been avoiding me, but he just felt bad betraying his best friend. I told him it was okay and asked him if we could still be a thing because I wanted him, and I knew that with the way he looked at me, he wanted me. I only spent 2 hours with Clark before I went back home, and luckily for me, Franklin never woke up the whole time. I knew that this move was risky, and I had to come up with new excuses for me to sneak out and meet Clark. I wouldn't deny the fact that if I was to choose, I would pick Franklin any time, and Clark was just a fling that I enjoyed sleeping with. We started preparation for the wedding immediately, which was scheduled for the next 2 months. I insisted that we calm down a little and make it 3 months instead, but Franklin said he was in a hurry to make me his wife, not knowing that deep down I was only concerned about my illicit affair. But I didn't stop. Even though I was worried about this, I didn't let it get through me and continued looking for excuses to meet with Clark. I know he still felt guilty that we slept together. He was still trying to avoid me, but I used excuses of meeting with our wedding planner, a dress fitting, and cake tasting, which Franklin believed without a doubt, to meet with Clark. 2 weeks before the wedding, I went to my dress fitting for the final adjustment before it was going to be delivered, using that moment as a perfect getaway moment. I went to meet Clark at a nearby hotel as we had earlier discussed after my dress fitting. We had fun, and as usual, I slept with him again. He asked if I wasn't even feeling an atom of regret, but I told him I wasn't, and that I feel so happy being with him, unlike being with my would-be husband, and that I was only going to marry him for his money since he lacks passion. I was so happy that everything was falling in place, and I was getting everything I wanted, someone to satisfy me, and someone that also had money, thinking Franklin would never find out about the affair, but little did I know that trouble awaits me. D-Day finally came. I woke up feeling so excited and happy that the day I was waiting for finally came. I took my bath, moisturized my skin, and literally doused myself in perfume. I styled my hair so nicely and did a very light makeup for myself. I wore my beautiful long white gown adorned with pearls around the waist and neck and set out to the venue. I got there, but Franklin wasn't there yet. I was scared, thinking something bad had happened to him, but I was calm after I saw him a few minutes later walking majestically. Franklin came in dressed in a nice tuxedo and looking dashing. I couldn't take my eyes off him, and the same could be said about him. He came closer and whispered to me that I looked so pretty. I smiled and blushed hearing him compliment me. The ceremony started quickly, and when it was time to read the vows and said our I do's, he stopped midway, turned to me and said all the sweet things anyone could say to their love. I felt so happy. Then he said that before he finished saying his vows, he had a surprise for me and I should enjoy it. I smiled, thinking that it was something nice, not knowing that it was doomed for me. He called the attention of everyone, and when he got them, he acknowledged the presence of both our parents and close relatives, including his friends. He told them about our first encounter and how it was love at first sight, and also our journey so far. He then said that he had a video to share. He gestured to Clark, and there was a big screen displayed at the back of the hall and a video projected towards it. To my utter disbelief, it was the video of my last meeting with Clark. I was dumbfounded, and everyone looked at me with disgust and disappointment, especially my parents who had high hopes for me. I couldn't say anything and just stood there frozen. Everyone left in disgust, and when it was the two of us, Franklin told me that he never for once doubted me and always trusted me. But 2 weeks ago, I broke the trust and the respect he had towards me. Apparently, after our last affair, Clark decided that it was high time he told Franklin, as he was feeling uncomfortable with the way we were betraying Franklin with our affair. This happened while I was in the office and they went for property surveying. At first, Franklin was shocked and angry at his friend, but when he realized that I was the one that seduced him before he succumbed, he became easy on him, but he couldn't forgive him completely. He was just happy he came clean. It was then Clark gave the recording he took of us in our last affair to him, which included the part I said I was only going to marry him for his money. I was shocked at this revelation and looked towards Clark in disbelief. He only looked away and walked out. I would have never thought he could do this to me, but who am I to say that? Because everything he said was true. After revealing this to me, Franklin stormed off feeling so hurt as the betrayal was too much to bear. I was left at the altar crying as I realized that I was so stupid and hurt a poor guy. After all that happened, I didn't know how to face anyone, and I cried at the altar. I don't know how many minutes passed, but I ran out and went back home to Franklin's house to see if I could beg him to forgive me, because I couldn't lose everything when I just got it. Franklin was not around as expected, so I waited for him, but he didn't come home that day. I feel bad about what I did, and everything started hitting me that I was a monster for even breaking apart a friendship. Update. After the incident that happened, Franklin's finally showed up at home. I immediately got on my knees, not caring about anything, and I asked if we could start again, but he told me that he could not, because he can't overlook the fact that I had an affair even when I was preparing for marriage, and that too with his best friend. He told me that he was hurt and betrayed and his trust had shattered beyond repairs. I looked down in guilt and cried, holding his feet and begging him to give me another chance. He carried me up and told me that he truly and deeply loved me, but he couldn't give me another chance anymore, so he asked me to leave. I left in shame and decided to meet with Clark and maybe reconnect with him. When I got to his house, I started talking to him to confront him, and he said I had no shame. I told him why he went to betray me and tell Franklin about us, but he just shook his head and asked me if I could hear myself. He said I sounded like I didn't care about anything but myself. I know he was right, but I couldn't say anything about it. I asked if we could go back to how we were, but ignored me and asked me to work on myself. I didn't want to lose everything, and I told him to forget about it and let's move on with our lives, and maybe I could start all over again with him. He laughed and told me that he wouldn't allow that to happen, shouting at me that I had lost my sense of reasoning and self-respect. He also told me never to contact any of us again, as they had cut ties with me. I was also fired from work and told me not to bother meeting Franklin because Franklin already called him and said he didn't want to talk to me. He also told him to tell me that he had already asked someone to bring all my belongings to my parents' place. I felt like I had been stabbed multiple times, and the pain I felt became unbearable. He told me to leave his apartment and shut the door in my face. I took a few steps forward towards the elevator and his words started ringing again in my head and I fainted on the spot. And when I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital with Franklin with me. I felt happy at first thinking he had forgiven me, but he said he only helped me for charity and that he was only here because he was called by whoever helped me as his number was on speed dial. He then left me and I never heard from him again. When I recovered, I went back to my apartment, but my parents kicked me out saying I was old enough. But I know it was because they didn't want the rumors of what I did to spread around in their workplace and give them problem. I had nowhere to go, and I had no money because I spent them all on clothes and shoes and things that are useless. I tried selling my belongings and I got this little apartment. I was left alone, racked with guilt and shame. I knew that I had made a terrible mistake, and I had to face the consequences of my actions. In the end, I was left with nothing but regret and sorrow. I had lost my husband, my family, and my self-respect all at once over a stupid lust and passion. I knew that I would never be able to undo the damage I had caused and vowed to never make the same mistake again. But isn't it too late? As I lay in my bed, my heart heavy with remorse, I realized that some sins could never be forgiven, no matter how hard you tried to make amends. Betrayal has a way of tearing lives apart, leaving nothing but broken hearts and shattered dreams. I learnt my lesson the hard way, and now I would carry the weight of my actions for the rest of my days. I would advise that no one tries to pull the stunt I just did, else would end up where I am today or even worse.